Alright guys, so this lesson is going to be a little bit longer today. I'm going to show you what I do whenever I edit a child studio session from start to finish. Before we go any further, real quick, click the subscribe button. That's going to keep you updated with all the new tutorials that we're going to be adding to the channel. Alright, so this little girl came in for Valentine's and Easter session. These are the photos that we've taken from the session. Now we want to do a little edit to these to just enhance them and get them looking a little up to par for mom. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Valentine's Day because that's what we did first. First thing I'm going to do is well, the first thing I do before I do anything, I hit the auto button just to kind of eye it up and see how close that is. So I'm going to select the auto button. I know when I look at that, that's not really an edit that I would come up with, so I'm just going to hit the reset. Okay, so I'm going to come down to tone curve. I'm going to play with that a little bit first, kind of brighten that up a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to start there with a little brightening, and I can see, kind of check right in this area, I can see some of my shadows that I want to pull up just a little bit. So I'm going to come up to shadows and just kind of see how I pulled those up just a little bit. Then my vibrance, I'm just going to kick that up a little bit, maybe to about a 10. Saturation, I'm going to check that at about a 10 as well. Next thing I'm going to do, oh, and I should have mentioned, I'm under the develop module for all this. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll down to the details tab, and I'm just going to add a little noise reduction into that. In the studio, you're typically not going to get noise. I like to do that just because it makes the skin just a little bit softer for my liking. Okay, so I can take a look at that and see that I'm pretty happy with how that edit looks. Next thing I want to do is a little pre-cropping. Remember in the other videos we talked about don't do a lot of pre-cropping, but obviously this needs straightened up and just kind of a little more presentable. So I'm going to come down to the transform tab. I'm going to check mark constrain crop, and I'm going to click auto. Sometimes this feature works great, sometimes it doesn't work great. You just have to kind of play with it. So that definitely cropped it in a little bit. I can tell it needs a little more fixing, so we're not showing the floor or the edges here. The next thing I'm going to do is click the crop and straighten tool at the top. I'm just going to bring that in a little bit, and I'm going to move that around until I'm happy with how that looks. All right, so that looks good to me right there. Okay, what I also need to do is come back and get the clone tool and kind of fill in the blanket area. I usually do that all at once, so we're not going to do that just yet, but I will show you how. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to sync all the pictures together, and we're going to apply this color tone to every single photo. So I've got the photo selected. This is the photo I want to use the settings from. I'm going to scroll over, and I have the shift button held down, and I'm going to click on the last photo. The next thing I'm going to do is click sync. Synchronize settings. What that's going to do is apply everything I did to the first photo to all of the photos that I have selected. So next thing we want to do is make sure most of these are check marked. We want the white balance to come over. We want the basic tone, tone curve, clarity, dehaze, sharpening, noise reduction. Effects, if you've added a vignette, you'll want that to come over. I didn't add one, but let's go ahead and check mark that here. And you're going to want to check mark color, split toning, and local adjustments. The next thing we're going to do is synchronize. And you can kind of see how that applied all the color to the rest of the pictures. So kind of keep in mind, even though you've applied a color to the rest of the pictures, don't always just assume that, hey, this is going to look good and just move on. I still kind of eye it up a little bit. Sometimes I've found when a child standing compared to sitting, the light can, my light's not changed, but just the angle they're standing in, and you know, kids, they run around a good bit during the session. They might not be in the perfect spot for a photo, but hey, I love their expression. I don't want to take the photo out, so I'm just going to adjust it on my end. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is come up and do edit. and select none so we can kind of go back to eyeing up the rest of our pictures. So what I'm going to do next is just kind of go through. Oh, let me show you this next thing. I'm going to hit fit just so I know I'm seeing exactly how I shot the picture. Okay, next thing I'm going to go through and just do that little pre-cropping and straightening. I'm hitting constrain crop and auto. I'm just going to do a little more of a crop here. And pretty much we're going to do that to all of the pictures. So while I'm doing this, I'll kind of just give you a little tip here. I have photographed a ton of children. They're not always the easiest to photograph. The thing about photographing kids, I kind of have a theory. It's expression over perfection. If I have a pose, it's not necessarily my favorite pose, but the child looks happy and has a natural smile, I'm going to leave that pose in there. I've found parents typically pick that pose a little quicker than they might pick the perfect pose, but the child doesn't look, it doesn't look like a natural smile. So I'm just kind of doing the same thing here, just kind of spot checking. All right, so I did just a little pre-cropping on the Valentine's Day photos. What I'm going to do now is add a vignette to the pictures. I always like to add a small vignette to most of my pictures because it just makes your subject pop out a little bit more. So under the Develop module, you're going to come down to Effects, and I'm just going to pull my vignette down a little bit. Now let me show you something. You don't want to do a drastic vignette. Personally, this is something I would not do. That's just a little bit too much. I'm just going to pull in just a slight vignette, and then I might pull that out to the edges or closer. It depends on, kind of depends on the backdrop. Every backdrop's just a little different. So we can see, I knew that was a little bright, but I knew that vignette was going to burn it down. So remember how we synced all the settings before? Now we're going to sync just the effects. So I'm going to come back. I've got the photo selected. I've added the vignette too. I'm going to come back to the beginning with my shift key down and select the first key and hit sync. Theoretically, you could leave everything check marked because I know all of my settings are the same. If you've adjusted any light, you're going to want to uncheck that. Say for example, if you turn the exposure down on one of the pictures, you're going to uncheck mark exposure because you don't want to apply that exposure setting to everything. So I'm going to synchronize that to add that little vignette just to give that picture just a little bit more of a pop. So I'm coming to the top. I'm going to do edit and select none. And then I'm going to come back and grab that first picture that I know just needs a little retouch with the blanket. I'm going to clone the blanket in here. So I'm going to come to the clone tool. I'm going to pick my size and feather. I kind of like a bigger feather so it blends better. If it's too hard, it's going to look like you cloned. And I'm just going to come here next and I'm going to fill in the blanket that was not there. So what I'm doing here, I'm moving the clone stamp around to pick up the areas that I wanted to pick up to cover that up. Clone Stamp in Lightroom is pretty good. I've found most of the time it can almost always pick up about where you would want to clone something from. There we go. So now we have the little blanket filled in. So that is kind of the gist on how we edited the Valentine's portion of this session. We're still going to do a little skin softening. I usually do all the skin softening at once. So we'll go over that, no worries. But that is the edit that we added to the Valentine's Day photos.